He told himself it was nothing. For weeks, he told himself that she was just someone who worked in his kitchen, that the way she looked at him, steady, unbothered, like she had already decided what she thought of him, meant nothing. He had built an empire on self-control. And then one evening, Zarian Voss, the most feared name in the entire Eastern Syndicate, walked down a corridor he had no reason to walk down, stopped outside a door he had no reason to stop at, and knocked. He had never done that. Not for anyone. Before we go any further, if you've ever loved someone who made you feel safe and terrified at the same time, subscribe right now. Because this story, it doesn't just pull at your heart, it grabs it and doesn't let go. The Voss name was not spoken lightly. In the circles that mattered, the ones that operated between midnight and dawn, in rooms with no windows and no witnesses, Zarian Voss was not a man, he was a consequence. A final answer to questions people should have never asked, 34 years old, unmarried, unreachable. He controlled 6 territories across the northern corridor, owned 3 legitimate corporations as cover, and had not once in a decade been seen losing his composure. Not in boardrooms, not in interrogation rooms, not even when the last rival who dared challenge his empire was brought to his feet. He simply looked at the man, said nothing, and left the room. That was enough. His compound sat at the edge of the city where wealth stopped being visible and started being felt. High stone walls, cameras on every corner, staff who had signed their silence before they signed their contracts. 43 rooms, 2 kitchens, one for the staff, one that almost no one knew about. He ate alone, always. No guests at that table, no exceptions. His head of staff, a sharp-eyed woman named Corvine who had worked for the Voss family for 19 years, ran the household with military precision. She hired, she fired, she decided who entered and who didn't. And 3 months ago, quietly, without ceremony, she had hired a new kitchen assistant, a young woman, quiet, unremarkable on paper, no connections, no references that raised flags, no reason to notice her. Except that one evening, when the scheduled cook fell ill and chaos quietly rippled through the kitchen, she stepped in. She cooked, and everything changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way earthquakes begin, deep underground, invisible, long before anyone feels the ground move. No one noticed it happening, least of all him. Her name was Sayersa Navan. And the night it all started, she was doing what she always did after a 12-hour shift, sitting on an overturned crate behind the service entrance, eating cold rice from a container she'd packed that morning because she never had time to eat during the day. She was 26. Careful. Quiet in the way that people become quiet when life has convinced them that being noticed rarely ends well. She had taken the job at the Voss compound because it paid 3 times what any other kitchen position in the city offered. She hadn't asked why. She knew better than to ask why. She had simply shown up on her first day, kept her head down, learned the layout in 2 hours, memorized every staff member's routine in 4, and made herself as invisible as the walls. Invisible was safe. Invisible was something she was very, very good at. She hadn't planned to cook that night. The head cook, Breslin, had collapsed mid-afternoon. Nothing serious. A fever. But the dinner schedule was Breslin's and Breslin's alone, and no one in the kitchen knew how to follow it without him. The assistant staff stood in a cluster near the prep counter, panicked, whispering. Sayersa watched them for exactly 40 seconds. Then she washed her hands, tied her apron, and started cooking. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask permission. She simply moved through the kitchen with a quiet authority that surprised even her. Pulling ingredients, adjusting the fire, building something from the instructions she had watched Breslin follow a dozen times and quietly memorized, because that was what she did. She watched, She remembered. She adapted. The meal was served. She went back to her crate. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The knock on the service door came 40 minutes later. One of the senior staff. Expression unreadable. Voice flat. He wants to see whoever cooked tonight's meal. Saoirse's stomach dropped so fast she felt it in her knees. I was only filling in. Breslin usually... He wasn't asking about Breslin. The walk through the compound felt like the longest of her life. She counted her steps without meaning to. 31 from the service corridor to the main hall, another 18 to the dining room doors. She stopped in front of them, breathed, went in. Zarian Voss was still at the table. Alone, as always. The plates had been cleared, but he hadn't moved. He sat with the stillness of someone who had never once needed to fill silence with noise. A man so accustomed to rooms bending around him that he simply waited and let them. He didn't look up immediately when she entered. That was somehow worse. She stood. She waited. The room felt like it was made of held breath. Then he looked at her. Dark eyes. Unhurried. The kind of attention that felt less like a compliment and more like an assessment. Like being read by something that decided fates. You cooked. Not a question. Yes, sir. A pause. Long, deliberate. Where did you learn to balance heat like that? She blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, it was not that. My grandmother. She cooked everything over open fire. She said the secret was never rushing the heat. Something moved behind his eyes. Brief. Gone before she could name it. She was right. The room went absolutely still. Because Zarian Voss did not say things like that. In 19 years, Corvine had never once heard him compliment a meal. Zarian stood slowly, straightening his jacket, and turned toward the corridor. From tomorrow, he said without looking back, she handles my meals. Saoirse's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. This was not invisible. This was the opposite of invisible. And deep in the part of her that had survived on instinct her entire life, something whispered a warning she didn't yet know how to hear. This is how it begins. And it never ends the way you think it will. By morning, the entire compound knew. Not because anyone announced it, not because Corvine sent a memo or posted a notice, but because in a household where silence was currency and information was power, news moved the way smoke did, low, fast, and impossible to stop once it started. The new kitchen girl was cooking for him now, privately, exclusively. The reactions were immediate and they were not kind. 3 senior kitchen staff had been with the compound for over 5 years. 2 of them had quietly hoped that with enough patience, enough precision, they might earn even a fraction of that kind of recognition. And this girl, this nobody who had been there barely 3 months, who no one had even learned the name of, had stepped in one night and been handed everything they had been reaching for. Jealousy, in a house like this, was not a small thing. It was a calculation. Saoirse felt it the moment she walked into the main kitchen that morning. The room didn't go loud. It went quiet. The specific kind of quiet that has weight behind it. Eyes that didn't meet hers. Movements that shifted just slightly away. She noticed all of it. She said nothing. Corvine handed her a folded card with the day's requirements in precise, small handwriting. No warmth, no explanation. Just the card and a look that said, "Don't make me regret this." Then, almost as an afterthought, the older woman paused at the doorway. "The second-floor kitchen is fully stocked," she said quietly. "Don't waste it." It wasn't kindness exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. Saoirse took the card, nodded once, walked to her station. She didn't see the woman in the doorway of the adjoining corridor until she was halfway across the room. Beautiful. Deliberately so. the kind of beautiful that had been cultivated alongside something harder underneath, stone beneath silk. She was dressed far too well to be staff. She stood with the ease of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged. Her eyes moved over Saoirse slowly, unhurried. Then the corner of her mouth lifted, just slightly. She said nothing, turned and walked away. Later, Saoirse would learn her name, Veira Sultan, daughter of Dravek Sultan, the most powerful financial ally in the Voss Empire. She had been moving through this compound for 2 years. She attended every formal gathering. She sat at the right hand of Zarian's business table. Everyone in the compound understood what she was positioned to become. Everyone except, apparently, him. That night, in the East Wing study, Zarian stood at his window with a glass he hadn't touched. His second-in-command, a careful, watchful man named Rue, waited near the door. "She didn't flinch," Zarian said. Rue said nothing. He had learned years ago that silence was the right response when Zarian thought out loud. "Most people flinch." A pause. "She just looked at me. Is that a problem?" Zarian set the glass down. "I don't know yet." A beat. "Look into her background." Rue turned to leave. "Rue." He stopped, quietly, because something about Saoirse Navan didn't sit right. Not in a threatening way, in a way he couldn't name. And that was far more dangerous. Zarian Voss could handle threats. He had built an empire on it. What he had never learned to handle was something that unsettled him without giving him a reason. She had done exactly that, in one evening, without trying. He thought if he understood her, the feeling would go away. He was wrong. The private kitchen was on the second floor of the East Wing. Saoirse hadn't known it existed until Corvine led her there. She stopped in the doorway for just a second and looked. It was nothing like the main kitchen below. No industrial shelving, no stacked crates, no overlapping smells of a dozen dishes colliding. This room was quiet and clean and deliberate. Dark stone countertops, copper fixtures, a window that looked over the eastern garden and beyond it the city. Hazy and distant, like something that couldn't quite reach you. She understood immediately why he kept it separate. She didn't understand why he was already in it when she arrived. Zarian stood near the window, not looking at the city but at a document on the counter. Dark shirt, collar open, sleeves pushed to his forearms. No jacket, no performance. He didn't acknowledge her entrance. She set her ingredients down quietly and began. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. She moved through the space carefully, learning it the way she learned everything, by feel, by instinct. He read, or appeared to. She noticed after a while that he hadn't turned the page. "You measure by eye." His voice cut through the silence, her hand stilled for just a fraction of a second over the pan. "Yes. Most trained cooks don't do that. I'm not a trained cook." A pause. "What are you then?" She considered the question more seriously than he probably expected. "Observant," she said finally. Something shifted in the room, the way temperature shifts just before weather changes. Subtle, then suddenly undeniable. He moved from the window to the other side of the counter, where he leaned against the stone and watched her work with quiet attention. Up close, it was more unnerving. Not because it felt hostile, because it didn't. "What are you making?" "Slow braised short rib. With a reduction, your head cook's recipe doesn't finish properly. He pulls it too early. The collagen hasn't had time to break down, so the texture is never quite." She stopped. "Sorry, you didn't ask for the technical explanation." "I did, actually." She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she didn't have a word for. Not amusement. Something more careful than that. "Finish the sentence." She did. All of it. The collagen, the reduction timing, the way the fat needed to render slowly or the whole balance collapsed. She talked and she cooked, and somewhere in the middle of it, she forgot, briefly, dangerously, that she was explaining braising science to the most feared man in 6 territories, like they were colleagues. When she caught herself, she went quiet abruptly. "You stopped," he said. "I was rambling. You were explaining something you understand completely." A pause. "There's a difference." She turned to look at him for the first time since she'd started cooking, still leaning against the counter, arms crossed loosely, that same unreadable attention. "No one's ever said that to me before," she said. It came out before she could stop it. Honest the way things are, honest when your guard slips for one unguarded second. He didn't respond immediately. She turned back to the pan, then quietly, "What did they say instead?" She almost didn't answer. "That I talk too much about things that don't matter." Silence. The reduction simmered, the kitchen filled with something warm and deep, and for a moment the compound outside ceased to exist. "It matters," he said. Simple. No performance in it. Saoirse kept her eyes on the pan because if she looked at him right now, something important would crack inside her chest, and she was not ready for that. She plated the dish, set it in front of him, stepped back. He ate slowly. She stood near the window and looked at the city and tried to remember all the very good reasons why invisible was better. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Same time tomorrow," he said. She nodded. He left. She stood in the kitchen alone for a full minute before she remembered to breathe. Because something had happened in that room she didn't have a name for yet. And the most frightening part wasn't that it had happened, it was that she hadn't wanted it to stop. The whispers found her by afternoon. "She's only been here 3 months. Someone's pulling strings. New girls don't survive this kind of attention. They burn in it." Saoirse heard every word. She was good at hearing things people assumed she couldn't. She kept her face neutral and her pace steady and gave no one the satisfaction of a reaction. What she couldn't ignore was the envelope slid under her door that evening. No name on the outside. Inside, a single card. Heavy paper. 4 words in elegant, unhurried handwriting. "We should talk." V. She went anyway, because not going felt like a different kind of weakness. Vera Sultan was waiting in one of the smaller sitting rooms on the ground floor. A room Saoirse had never been invited into, which Vera clearly knew, because the way she gestured to the chair across from her carried the specific weight of a woman reminding someone of their place. Saoirse sat. She did not fidget. "You've made quite the impression," Vera said. Smooth. Practiced. "I'm doing my job." A slight tilt of the head. "And what exactly is your job now? It seems to change daily." Saoirse said nothing. Vera leaned forward, just enough to cross the line between polite and pointed. "Men like Zarian don't notice people like you out of kindness." Her voice dropped. "When he pays attention to something, really pays attention, it's because he wants to understand it. Take it apart." "And when he's done understanding it?" Saoirse asked. Vera smiled. "Beautiful. Completely empty. He moves on." She stood, smoothed her jacket, looked down at Saoirse with something constructed to resemble pity. "Leave before you become a lesson." The door closed softly. Saoirse sat in the empty room, then stood, straightened, walked back to her station. She had survived worse warnings than that. What she hadn't survived, not yet, was the question Vera had planted like a splinter. What if she was right? 3 days later, everything Saoirse had quietly built came apart in a single evening. It began with a dinner. Not the private kind. A formal one. 30 guests. The kind who arrived in cars with tinted windows and left their bodyguards at the gate. Business associates. Allies. People whose names ran the legitimate surface of things that were not entirely legitimate underneath. Corvine came to find her mid-afternoon, expression tighter than usual. "You'll be serving tonight?" Saoirse looked up. I thought Breslin's team handled formal dinners. Tonight you'll assist. She understood immediately. It wasn't an elevation, it was an exposure. Someone had arranged for her to be visible in a room full of people who would look at her and see exactly what she was, a nobody in an apron standing in a space that wasn't built for her. She went anyway. The dining room at full capacity was a different beast entirely. Candlelight, crystal. The low, dangerous hum of powerful people performing ease for one another. Saoirse moved through it carefully, a ghost in dark uniform, keeping her eyes down and her presence small. She spotted Vera immediately, seated 3 chairs from the head of the table, dressed in deep green, watching Saoirse's every move with an expression of composed, patient interest, waiting for something to go wrong. Certain it would. It worked, for a while. Then a hand closed around her wrist. The man was seated near the far end of the table, broad, the kind of loud that came from a lifetime of never being told no. He held her wrist with the casual grip of someone who had never considered that other people had edges. You're the one he keeps upstairs, are you? Saoirse kept her face still. I'm kitchen staff, sir. Kitchen staff. He said it like something amusing. His grip didn't loosen. I'd appreciate if you'd let go of my wrist. He laughed, started to say something else. The entire room went silent. All 30 guests. All at once. Zarian was already standing. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply rose from his chair at the head of the table with a slowness that was more frightening than speed. The kind of movement that said the outcome was already decided. He walked the length of the table in absolute silence and stopped beside her, looked at the hand on her wrist. Let go. 2 words. Completely quiet. The man released her immediately. Zarian looked at Saoirse, just a fraction of a second. And something passed between them she couldn't name and wouldn't forget. Then he turned to the room. Dinner is concluded. No explanation, no apology, just that. The room emptied in 12 minutes. Across the table, Vera's composed expression had gone very still. Not angry. Something colder than that. Recalculating. Saoirse stood in the corridor afterward, back against the cold stone wall. He had ended a dinner. For her. In front of everyone who mattered in his world. That was not a small thing. That was the kind of thing that got noticed. The kind that had consequences. She just didn't know yet how severe they would be. The consequences arrived the next morning. Quietly, as they always did in this world. The dangerous things never announced themselves. They arrived as a loosened stair runner, a rearranged shelf, a feeling at the back of the neck that came before any visible reason for it. Saoirse's feeling arrived on the staircase. She was carrying a tray from the lower kitchen to the 2nd floor when she noticed the runner on the 3rd step had been pulled slightly loose. Not the whole thing, just enough. Just where the weight of a step would catch it wrong. She noticed because she always noticed things. She stepped around it, continued up. Then she found her food stores had been moved. Not ransacked. Simply reorganized. Every ingredient she had personally sourced shifted into a different configuration, a few things missing, 2 things added that she hadn't ordered and didn't recognize. She stood in front of the open shelf for a long moment. Then she locked it, pocketed the key, and said nothing to anyone. Because fear in a place like this was information. You didn't give it away for free. That afternoon, one of the junior kitchen staff caught her arm in the supply corridor. The girl looked uncomfortable, like someone delivering news they'd rather not carry. I thought you should know, she said quietly. I saw Miss Sultan near the East Service corridor this morning. Early, before anyone else was up. She released Saoirse's arm and walked away without another word. That was enough. That evening, Rue came to find her. He wants to know if anything has happened that you'd like to report. Nothing I can't manage. That's not what he asked. She looked at Rue steadily. The stair runner on the east staircase needs refastening. Third step. And the second-floor storage was accessed without my knowledge. A pause that confirmed what she already knew. I'll have it seen to and look into the storage. Thank you. She paused. Rue. Make sure Corvine knows. He nodded once and left. Saoirse sat by the window afterward and thought carefully about what kind of person rearranged food stores and loosened stair runners instead of doing something direct. Someone patient. Someone who wanted it to look like an accident. Someone who had done this before and would do it again without hesitation. She thought about leaving. Genuinely, seriously, for the first time. Then she thought about the private kitchen, the window, the city below. The way he'd said it matters like it was simply a fact he was correcting, not a kindness he was offering. She stayed. Brave or foolish. At this point, she suspected it was both. Rue delivered his findings 4 days later. He placed a single folded page on the counter in front of Saoirse without preamble and waited. She picked it up. It was thorough. Employment history, addresses, education, family details. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Except for the 7 years before she turned 19. The names were there. Dates, places. But they were wrong. She could feel it the way you feel a wrong note in a familiar song. Not because you can name the key, but because something in your body already knows. The town listed wasn't where she grew up. The school wasn't the one she remembered. The details surrounding her mother's name were arranged like furniture in a room that no one actually lived in. Plausible, but not real. She set it down. This isn't accurate. I know, Rue said. How long have you known? Since the first check. A pause. He's known for nearly 2 weeks. The air in the room changed. He didn't say anything to me. No. Why? Because he wanted to know if you already knew. Rue held her gaze. Do you? She opened her mouth. Closed it. There were things in her memory that had always felt slightly misaligned. Not missing. More like photographs where the background didn't match the foreground. She had learned not to pull at those edges because when she did, the pieces didn't come loose cleanly. They came loose sharp. No, she said finally. Not yet. Rue left the page on the counter and moved toward the door. He wants to speak with you tonight. His study, 9 o'clock. After he left, Saoirse sat very still for a long time. Someone had built a version of her past and slotted her neatly into it, carefully, expensively, with intention. The question wasn't who. The question, the one that sent cold moving slowly through her, was why, and whether the person who had done it was still watching. She had intended to go to the study. She'd gotten as far as the east corridor, the folded page in her hand, her footsteps measured and even, and then something had stopped her. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of needing to sit with what she already knew before anyone added more to it. Like taking a breath before going underwater. She went back to her room instead. She was still dressed at 9 o'clock, sitting on the edge of the bed, turning the page over in her hands when the knock came. She assumed it was Rue with a message. She opened the door. It was not Rue. Zarian Voss stood in the narrow corridor in the dark. No jacket, no entourage, no ceremony. Just him and the low light from the wall fixture, and the fact that this was something that simply did not happen. He had never, in the 3 months she had been here, been anywhere near this part of the compound. She stared at him. He said, "May I come in?" Asked, not commanded. She stepped back. He entered. The room was small. A bed, a desk, a narrow wardrobe. And on the desk, the one thing she took with her everywhere, her grandmother's wooden recipe box, worn smooth at the corners from years of handling. He noticed it immediately. She watched him notice it. He didn't comment. He stood near the window and looked at her. "I should have told you sooner," he said, "about the file." She crossed her arms. Not defensively, just to have something to hold on to. "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to understand it first. And because I wasn't sure how much you already knew, and I didn't want to give you information you might use to disappear." The honesty of it stopped her. "You thought I'd run." "I thought it was possible." His eyes didn't move from her face. "Were you going to?" She didn't answer immediately. "I don't know." "That's honest." "I'm trying to be." A silence settled between them, not tense, not loaded, the kind that exists when two people are thinking through the same problem from different sides of it. "Someone rewrote your past," he said. Carefully, expensively. It was done 9 years ago. 9 years. She'd been 17. Why would someone do that to a 17-year-old? To hide her? Simply. Or to hide what she came from. "Do you know what I came from?" He was quiet for a moment that felt like standing at the top of a staircase in the dark, not knowing how many steps there were. "I have a theory. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet." A flash of frustration. "That's not fair." "No." No apology. "But if I tell you before I'm certain and I'm wrong, I'll have given you a weight you can't put back down." His eyes held hers. "I'm not willing to do that." It was perhaps the most careful thing anyone had ever said to her. She sat on the edge of the desk because her legs felt unreliable. "What do I do in the meantime?" He moved, just slightly, just enough to close the distance, and crouched down to her eye level in a way that felt entirely unlike him and entirely necessary. "You keep cooking. You keep showing up. You act as though nothing has changed." "And if something happens?" His jaw tightened. "Nothing will happen. You can't promise that." "No. But I can make very clear to everyone in this compound what the consequences would be of allowing it." His voice dropped. "Which I've already done." She looked at him. Really looked. The way she hadn't permitted herself before. And for the first time she saw past the composure and the reputation to the thing underneath all of it. He was worried about her. Not strategically, not as a calculation. Actually worried in the unguarded way of someone who has stopped being able to pretend otherwise. Zarian. The first time she had used his name, it landed differently than she expected, not wrong, just large. He didn't react to it, just waited. "Why does this matter to you?" The question sat between them like something alive. He stood slowly, looked at the recipe box on her desk, then back at her. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "We'll talk tomorrow." He left. She sat in the dark for a long time, not because she was frightened, because he hadn't answered the question. And somehow, the way a silence can be more telling than any answer, that told her everything. 2 days later, he arrived without warning, the way the truly dangerous ones always did. Sersa heard the commotion from the east corridor. Raised voices, the particular quality of urgency that moved through the compound when something had gone wrong in a way that couldn't be contained quietly. She stayed where she was supposed to stay, for 4 minutes. Then she went to look. The front reception room was crowded in a way it never was. 6 of Zarian's security, Rue with his jacket half-buttoned, Corvine standing near the back wall doing complex calculations behind her eyes. In the center of the room stood a man she had never seen before, around 40, well-dressed without any trace of formality about it. His eyes moved around the room with unhurried interest, cataloging everything. And then they landed on her standing in the doorway. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing warm inside it. "There she is," he said pleasantly. "To no one. To everyone." Zarian stepped forward from the far side of the room, placing himself between the man and Sayersha in a movement so immediate and sure it was clearly not the first time he had needed to do it. "Davin." Flat. "You weren't invited." Since when do I need an invitation? The man, Davin, tilted his head slightly. His eyes hadn't moved from the space just past Zarian's shoulder. I heard you'd developed new interests. I wanted to see for myself. You've seen? The smile held. She's interesting. I'll give you that. Rue, show him out. Davin let himself be guided toward the door without resistance, which was far more unsettling than if he had fought it. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back. Not at Zarian. At her. I'll be seeing you, he said pleasantly. Then he was gone. Sayersha looked at Zarian. He was already looking at her, jaw set. Something dark living just beneath the surface of him. Who is he? Rue answered before Zarian could. Davin Creel. He controls the western routes. He and Zarian have been in opposition for several years. He takes things, Zarian said quietly, that don't belong to him. The room was very still. She understood then exactly what kind of threat Davin Creel was. He hadn't come to intimidate. He hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to measure, to decide. And she understood, with a cold certainty that settled in her chest like stone, that he had already made up his mind. The research came back in pieces over the following week. Rue delivered each piece to Zarian privately, and Zarian, true to whatever new honesty had opened between them in the narrow corridor of her quarters, told Sayersha each thing as he learned it, in the private kitchen, over the low sound of whatever she was cooking. She had come to understand this was intentional. The kitchen was neutral ground. It was where she was steadiest, and he knew it. The first piece. Her mother's name had been Ihsan Navan. But Navan was not her birth name. It was a name she had taken legally, carefully, exactly at the same time she had moved to the city where Sayersha grew up. The second piece. Ihsan had left somewhere in a hurry. The kind of departure that meant she was running from something. The kind that meant she had known, even then, that the running might not last forever. The third piece arrived on a Thursday morning, and Zarian came to deliver it in person. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before he spoke, which he didn't usually do. He usually just entered. I need you to sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. He looked at her for a moment. Let it go. Your mother's original name was Ihsan Karo. He watched her face carefully. Does that mean anything to you? It meant nothing. She told him so. The Karo family controlled trade infrastructure across 4 northern territories for almost 30 years. They were dismantled, businesses seized, assets frozen, families scattered. 11 years ago. A pause, measured and deliberate. At the order of Davin Creel. The kitchen was very quiet. My mother was running from Davin Creel. Yes. For years. My whole life. She changed your names, rewrote your histories. She was ensuring that if anyone ever came looking for what remained of the Karo line, they wouldn't find you. He didn't soften it. She had come to understand that was a form of respect from him. She was protecting you. She was keeping me in the dark. Both things can be true. She turned back to the counter. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She had expected them to shake. So when Davin looked at me across that dinner table, he recognized your mother's features. It would have taken him approximately 30 seconds to be certain. She closed her eyes briefly. He didn't come to inspect your new interests, she said. No. He came to confirm what you were. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. And what am I? Zarian held her gaze. For the first time since she had known him, there was something in his face that had nothing to do with calculation or strategy. The last of a line Davin Creel thought he'd finished erasing, he said quietly. Which means, in his world, you are either leverage or a loose end. A beat of silence. And he doesn't leave loose ends. She processed it the way she processed most things. Quietly. Alone. In the space between knowing something and fully feeling it. But that night, something shifted. She was in the private kitchen long after she should have been, not cooking, just sitting in the dark with the window open and the city humming far below, when the door opened and Zarian came in. He stopped when he saw her. "You're still here." "I didn't want to go back to my room. I think better here." He came and sat on the opposite side of the counter, closer than usual, the counter between them like a table where two people sit down to talk about something real. "I keep thinking about my mother," she said. He waited. "She cooked constantly. Every mood, every season, every problem. I used to think it was simply who she was." She looked at her hands. "Now I think she cooked because it was the one place she felt like herself. The one place none of it could reach her." She looked up. "I do the same thing, don't I?" Not a question. "Yes," he said. "You noticed." "The first night." She absorbed that, the idea that he had seen something in her before she had seen it in herself. "I don't know how to be angry at her," she said. "She spent her whole life making sure I could just exist. Not as a target, not as a name, not as the last remnant of something someone wanted to finish erasing." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "And it worked. For 19 years. And then she died," he said quietly, "and there was no one left to keep the story in place." "Yes." A silence. "I've been invisible my whole life," she said. "I thought I chose it. I thought it was a skill I developed on my own." She exhaled. "But it wasn't. It was something she built around me before I was old enough to know I was inside it. And now, I don't know who I am without it." Zarian was quiet for a moment. "I know something about that," he said. She looked at him and waited, because rushing him meant getting the surface rather than the thing underneath. "My father built this empire," he said. "Every territory, every rule, every alliance. I inherited it at 26 and ran it exactly as he designed, because I was certain this was who I was." A pause. "It took me until recently to consider that I might have confused inheriting something with choosing it." "What changed?" she asked softly. He looked at her. He didn't answer with words, but the answer was there, fully, undeniably, in the way he held her gaze without the performance of distance he wore everywhere else, and she understood it completely. Her heart did something she had stopped arguing with weeks ago. "Zarian." "I know," he said quietly. "I know what I'm saying, and I know the timing is wrong. I'm not asking anything of you. I just need you to know that whatever you decide, whatever comes next, it doesn't change what I think of you." A breath. "It doesn't change what this is." She held his gaze. "Then what does it change?" He opened his mouth. A knock at the door. Hard. Urgent. Rue's voice through the wood. "We have a problem." Zarian's expression closed like a shutter. He stood, looked at her one final moment. "Stay here," he said. She let him go first, because she needed one more second in that kitchen, in the dark, with what he'd almost said still suspended in the air like something that hadn't yet finished becoming real. Then she followed. Rue was in the corridor, composed in the careful way of someone managing something serious. "Davin's people took Corvine 20 minutes ago, outside the east gate. He left a message." Zarian's face didn't change. "Say it." Rue looked briefly at Saoirse, then back. "Send the girl and Corvine comes back before morning. Don't. And she doesn't come back at all." The corridor went completely silent. Saoirse felt the weight of it land on her chest like something physical. Corvain, 19 years of quiet, unsentimental loyalty, taken because of a name Saoirse hadn't even known she carried until this week. She stepped forward. "I'll go." "No." Before she finished the sentence. "Corvine didn't choose any of this. Neither did you." "Zarian." "No." He turned to face her fully, and the thing underneath all that composure, The thing she had been glimpsing in fragments for weeks was completely visible now, raw and certain and not performing anything. I am not sending you to Davin Creel. She could die because of me. I will get Corvine back. That is a separate problem with a solution that does not involve you walking into his hands. His voice was steady, but the edges of it were not. You are not a hostage to him. You are not leverage. You are a line he wants finished. There is a difference, and it matters. She stared at him. You don't get to decide that for me. You're right. He stepped closer, not to intimidate, the precise opposite of that. So I'm asking, not telling, asking. His voice dropped to something entirely unguarded. Please don't do this. The word please undid her. Not because he had never said it before, because she understood exactly what it cost him. She looked at him for a long moment. Get Corvine back, she said quietly, and then we finish this. Something moved across his face. Relief, and something heavier than relief. Something that had been held very tightly for a long time and was only now, carefully, beginning to loosen. Together, he said. She nodded. He held her gaze one more second, like he was making sure she was still real, then turned to Rue. Bring everyone in. We move in 2 hours. And Rue, no one comes near this floor. No one. I know, Rue said quietly. Zarian looked back at her once more before he walked away. She stood in the corridor long after his footsteps faded, because that one word, together, had rearranged something in her that she suspected was not going back to the way it had been before. They moved at midnight. Saoirse watched from the second-floor window as vehicles rolled out through the east gate. Careful, no lights where lights could be avoided. Rue stayed behind with 4 others, stationed at every entry point of the compound. She was supposed to wait. She sat on the edge of the kitchen counter and tried. 15 minutes in, the memories started. Not softly. Not the way memories usually surface in quiet moments or the half-light before sleep. These came the way a dam gives way. One crack, and then another, and then everything at once, rushing through all the spaces in her mind she had always been aware of, but never been able to enter. She was 9 years old, and her mother was teaching her to make her grandmother's soup, and the kitchen smelled of cardamom and wood smoke, and her mother looked at her across the pot and said, "Whatever happens, this stays with you. You carry this." She was 14, and her mother was on the phone very late at night with her voice held low and careful, and Saoirse had stood in the dark hallway listening without understanding what she was hearing. She was 16, and there was a man at the door she had never seen before, and her mother closed it so fast the latch rattled in its frame, and after that they moved. They were always moving. She was 17, sitting in a kitchen that wasn't theirs yet because they'd only arrived 3 weeks earlier, and her mother sat across from her and said quietly, "If anyone ever asks, your name is Navan. It has always been Navan. Say it like you believe it." She had not understood then. She understood now. She went to her room, lifted out the grandmother's recipe box from the desk, worn smooth at the corners, smelling faintly of cardamom even now, years later, and opened the lid. Beneath the last handwritten recipe page, tucked carefully against the wooden base where it had rested for 9 years, was a folded piece of paper. Her mother had pressed it into her hand in the hospital at the end, too weak to explain it. Saoirse had carried it in the box ever since, moving it from city to city, kitchen to kitchen, without ever finding the courage to open it. She opened it now, her mother's handwriting, cramped and fast and clearly written with urgency, but every word chosen. Your real name is Saoirse Carreau. You are the daughter of Isaane Carreau, and you come from a line of people who built things and were not ashamed of it. They took everything from us, but they cannot take what you know and what you are. Do not be small. Do not be invisible. You were not made to disappear. I am sorry I couldn't tell you while I could still see your face. Cook well. Remember everything. Come back to yourself when you're ready. I love you more than all of it." She sat on the floor of her room and let herself feel the full weight of 9 years of not knowing. Then she folded the letter, put it in her pocket, stood up. When Zarian's convoy returned close to dawn with Corvine, shaken, bruised, but alive, and already straightening her collar before they'd even cleared the gate, Saoirse was standing in the courtyard. Zarian stepped out of the lead vehicle and saw her, and went very still. She walked toward him. "My name," she said, "is Saoirse Carreau." Something in his face broke open and rebuilt itself in the space of a single second. "I know," he said quietly. "You've known for a while." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell." He stepped closer. "It was yours to find." She looked at him for a long moment. All of him. The composure that wasn't coldness. The control that wasn't distance. The man who had come to her door and asked. "Davin Creel is going to come back," she said. "Yes." "And this time he'll come directly." "Yes." "Then we deal with it directly." She held his gaze without wavering. "Together. Not me waiting upstairs." He studied her face. Then something in him settled. The quiet, definitive way a decision finally lands in a person when they stop fighting it. "Together," he said. "From here." She exhaled slowly. Behind her, Corvine was being helped inside, already issuing quiet instructions to the staff, as if she had simply been delayed rather than held captive for an entire night. The city hummed beyond the walls the way it always did. Indifferent, ongoing, unchanged. Tonight, she had her name back. Tonight, that was enough. Davin Creel came 4 days later. In broad daylight, which was the arrogance of it. 15 vehicles, 50 men, arriving at the compound gates like a statement rather than an assault. Like he had already decided the outcome and was simply arriving to collect it. He was wrong. Zarian had spent 4 days making sure he was wrong. Saoirse stood in the East Wing corridor with Rue when the first gate alarm sounded. His instruction was to take her to the secured room on the 3rd floor. She had agreed to this. She had meant it at the time, but when the sounds from the outer courtyard reached them, steady, not chaotic, proceeding exactly as planned, something in her shifted. Not fear. The opposite of fear. Clarity. She had spent 9 years being moved out of the way of things, renamed, relocated, carried inside a story that someone else had been telling about her. She was done being carried. "Rue." He looked at her. "I need to be present for this. To stand inside my own story rather than waiting at a distance to hear what happened in it." He looked at her for a long moment. "2nd floor landing. You see everything, but you stay back unless I say otherwise." She nodded. From the landing, she watched the outer courtyard through the wide east window. Precision, not chaos. Every entry point covered. Every route sealed before Davin's men even understood the routes were sealed. Zarian had built this over 4 days, and it held completely. When they brought Davin Creel inside, Vera Sultan was already gone. She had left the compound that same morning, quietly, with her bags, without a word to anyone. The moment Dravek Sultan's office confirmed that his alliance with the Voss Empire was being formally dissolved. She hadn't said goodbye. She wasn't the kind of person who did. Davin stood in the reception room with 3 of Zarian's men behind him and looked at Saoirse with those same measuring eyes that had found her at the dinner table 2 weeks ago. This time, she didn't look away. "Your mother hid you very well," he said. "She did," Saoirse said. "But that wasn't your failure. You were patient. So was she." "And now?" he asked. "Now I have her records." Steady. Clear. Every document she kept. Every transaction. Every agreement you made and unmade over 30 years. She didn't run because she was frightened. She ran because she was waiting. For the right person. The right moment. The right place to put everything she knew. Saoirse looked at him without flinching. She just didn't live long enough to do it herself. The ease left his face. Fully. And finally. Rue, Zarian said from the doorway. Make the calls. Davin Creel said nothing more. It was over. Not with fire. Not with the kind of destruction that left things permanently broken. With a truth a woman had carried for 19 years folded inside a recipe box, preserved in careful handwriting, waiting for a daughter who was finally ready to use it. Saoirse looked at him one last time. My mother said to remember everything, she said. She remembered everything. A week later, the compound was quiet again. A different kind of quiet. Not the kind maintained through discipline and the performance of calm. This was quiet that had passed through something and arrived on the other side, settled, earned, real. Saoirse stood on the east wing balcony in the late afternoon, looking out over the city, thinking about her mother, about all the kitchens she had stood in across her whole life, and how she was the same person in every one of them. Just in different rooms, at different temperatures, learning different things. She heard him before she saw him. He came to stand beside her. Not behind, not in front. Beside. For a while they looked at the city together without speaking. Corvine gave her notice, he said. She's leaving? She says she's too old for somewhere that keeps getting complicated. A pause. I suspect complicated is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I suspect so too. I've been thinking about what comes next, Saoirse said. He waited. I could stay, or I could do what my mother never could. Build something with my real name. Something honest. She paused. Which is harder than it sounds in the world you operate in. Our world, he said quietly. She looked at him. If you stay, he said, it isn't mine that you're living in. It's ours. That means something different. How long have you been thinking about this? He was quiet. She knew that silence, the one where he decided how honest to be. Then, since the morning you walked into the private kitchen and told me my head cook was pulling the reduction too early. She laughed. A real one, surprised entirely out of her. He looked at her when she laughed, and his expression did the thing she had only seen once before. In the dark kitchen, the night Rue knocked. Open, unguarded. A window in a wall never meant to have one. I have conditions, she said. I expected you would. Honesty. Always. I run my own work and my own name. I know that. And if I cook for you? She pointed at him. It's because I want to. Not because it's my function. The corner of his mouth moved. Understood. She turned back to the city. He was still looking at her. There's something you never finished saying, she said. In the kitchen. The night Rue knocked. You said it doesn't change what you think of me. I asked what it does change. You never answered. A pause. Longer than most. Everything else, he said. How I move through this, what I'm building it for, what I go home to. A beat. What I'm not willing to lose. She held his gaze. Then stay honest, she said. Always, he said. Standing on the balcony with the city spread below them and everything that had been buried for so long finally out in the open between them, she believed him. Not because the world had become simple or safe, but because he had come to her door in the dark, and knocked, and asked. And for a man who never asked anything of anyone, that was everything. If this story stayed with you, subscribe now. Because the next one starts somewhere you won't expect, and ends somewhere you will never forget.